All right, thanks for tuning in to OFN College Football Weekly with Mitch Light of Athlon Sports for this Thursday, the 21st of November, 2019, on the Our Football Radio Network at ourlads.com. The king of online football depth charts and college football scouting. OFN College Football Weekly is brought to you by Athlon Sports, the leading publisher of preseason annuals for more than 50 years, sold in 60,000 outlets nationwide. And Mitch, we are in the stretch drive. We're actually already beginning the rivalry games. It's unfortunate. It used to be years ago. We get all these rivalry games like in the last weekend of the regular season. Now they're kind of split apart, which is actually I guess it's better because we get the opportunity to maybe see all of them instead of missing half of them because there's only so many televisions to go around or so many networks to go around back in the day. But it's fun. It's a good opportunity for us to watch rivalries. And then, of course, we'll have a championship game in a few weeks as well. So this is really when things start heating up.
Yeah, Cal Stanford's always the one that jumps out at me. Like, I'll just be preparing for a week's games, and I'm like, oh, wow, they're playing already? Season must be pretty much over. I don't know why they don't play in the final week of the season because I think they both have games next week before, the league championship game. Not that either one of them are going to be playing. But, yeah, I guess it's good to space them out. I love the next week. Thanksgiving's great. You always got the Egg Bowl Thursday night, which is fun, even if neither team is very good like this year. I always say the Egg Bowl might be. We had a feature in our magazine this year about it. It's not the best rivalry in college football, but it might be the most heated now. Those two fan bases just absolutely hate each other. But we'll talk about that one next week.
Now, as far as your predictions, that's what we're going to start our show with here until we know for sure what the playoff four is going to look like. Of course, rankings came out a few days ago. Nothing really changed last week. I went with LSU over Oregon in the championship game, so I'm not changing. There's no reason for me to change my mind because Georgia was in my Final Four, and they wound up beating Auburn. Your Final Four, you had Utah as really the only surprise, or Oregon was my surprise. So any changes?
No. I would see how the season plays out. It'd be difficult to drop LSU if they beat Georgia in the SEC championship game, but I thought that there was some maybe momentum of Ohio State jumping LSU, just because it's like there's a bunch of old football coaches on that committee who love to play, love to watch good defense. I thought they might have been a little horrified watching, Ole Miss run for 300 yards against LSU. But they kept LSU number one, so that's what I'm going to watch. Obviously, there's a ton of things to watch, but not only does LSU win out, how do they look defensively, and how does Ohio State continue to dominate? Is there a chance that Ohio State or Clemson could jump to number one, even if LSU doesn't win, even if LSU keeps winning?
Well, I think there's a real good chance that before the SEC championship game, with Ohio State playing Penn State this week, Michigan next week at Michigan, with how as good as Michigan's playing, that if Ohio State wins these two games, that they'll be number one.
Yeah, because the one thing that's keeping them back right now is resume. Mm-hmm. You could argue they've been more dominant than LSU, but you can't argue that their resume is better. Well, if they beat Penn State and then Michigan on the road, then the resumes start to look a little more equal, and then you can start looking at how those teams actually played. So, they're both obviously really, really good teams. LSU against a better schedule have definitely shown some deficiencies on defense.
All right, now as far as Tua's injury. I want to remind everybody that if you were listening last week, we were already questioning whether he should have played last week. Matter of fact, I even talked about, well, why don't you not play him? If by halftime or in the second half you're in a close game, you can bring him in. So now you got a lot of people going, there's a lot of second guessers, or of course he should stay in the game. It was only the first half, and they were only up by 28 points or something silly like that. I mean, come on. It's just Saban has got to be better, smarter than this. There was no reason for that kid to be in the game last week.
Yeah, well, it's obviously a complex situation, and we don't obviously know all the medicals. We weren't there, but just watching him walk off the field after the LSU game, he was obviously limping, which shows that while he was healthy to start and obviously good enough to play that game, that there was wear and tear on him. So it's going to continue to nag him. So I was in favor of not playing him. One theory I don't like, I've seen people throw out there, well, it's a product of the college football playoff system where teams have to blow, they had to blow people out
No.
because they're probably not going to win. I don't subscribe to that at all. First of all, I think it's the contrary. I think you get up 35-7 or whatever it was in the second quarter, then you pull them and you say, hey, committee, here's how dominant we were with him
That's
in
right.
there. Now we're pulling because he's
Right.
hurt. So I thought that would have been a good time to pull him. I don't buy the 2-minute drill. Want to give him the 2-minute drill. That's basically the entire offense is up tempo.
Yeah.
So it's obviously it's an unfortunate situation for all parties. It hurts Alabama, hurts the kid. Hopefully he can, make a full recovery. They have talked about comparing his injury to Bo Jackson. I can't speak to that exactly, but you'd also like to think that 30 years later there's better
Absolutely.
medicine
Yes.
proved. They know how to attack that injury more than they did 30 years ago.
Yeah, and of course we everybody's hoping that he's okay for the next level because the NFL needs quarterbacks like Tua. And it would be a big blow for everybody, including, of course, most of all him, if he couldn't make it in the NFL because of health reasons. So we'll see. As far as Georgia over Auburn, they made it close. They didn't have to make it close, but they did. But Georgia, I think we kind of analyzed the game appropriately. Both very good defenses. The big difference was Jake Fromm. He didn't have big stats, but when he needed to make plays, he did. That's what the kid does. Give a lot of credit for Auburn for making the comeback. And without Tua, hey, you know what? I think Auburn's going to beat Alabama.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me because their defense is so good. Auburn just...
They might have the best defense in college football.
Yeah, that schedule has been brutal. Georgia might have Georgia can make that argument too. Georgia and Clemson are the only two teams that have not given up more than 20 points in a game. So that was an impressive win for Georgia. Like it was great defense going on the road. Fromm's numbers weren't great. Did enough there. You look at, I'm just going to look it up, but I think Bo Nix threw the ball like 40 times or something,
50,
or maybe 30 something.
50. He was like 30 of 50.
I didn't want to exaggerate. I didn't want to be wrong and go too high. But that's not a recipe for success for Auburn football to have their freshman quarterback throw 50 times. So, Georgia reinvigorated. Now that they're, it's all, we knew it was all there in front of them even after the South Carolina loss. But the fact that they're fourth in the college football playoff rankings, their defense is really good. We'll just find out, is that offense going to be good enough to beat, we think they'll beat Texas A&M, but to beat LSU in the championship game. That's going to be a fun game, assuming that happens.
All right. Now, you have a 3-star pick in the SEC. Not a lot of big games this week. So, Texas A&M Georgia game is the biggest one. Georgia favored by 13. And by the way, I do like Georgia in the game, but I understand why it's 13. If this was LSU or Alabama, this would be in the 20s. But Georgia's offense just isn't explosive enough to be giving up more than, I guess, 13 in the spot. But still, it's a generous number, which is why I would take Georgia.
Yeah, you said it. You look at their scores this year and you say, are they going to score enough to cover that number? Against the Texas A&M team that's playing really well, Keller Mond's playing well, but the schedule has not been very good, of late. They're taking care of business.
Yeah. But when they have to step up in competition, that's when they have problems.
Right. They still have Georgia and LSU, and by the way, they played Alabama and Clemson and Auburn, so the schedule is absolutely brutal. Yeah. I'm with you. The number scares me a little bit. I think A&M will play relatively well, but just there's no track record of teams scoring a lot on this Georgia defense, and with so much at stake for Georgia, I would expect them to win. And I'm sure you've seen this thrown out there, but A&M joined the league in 2012. This is the first time they've played since.
Yeah, that is nuts. That's ridiculous. They got to figure that out. And I was watching one of those ESPN 150 specials, and they were talking about the rivalries over the years, and you forget some of them, even the little ones like Missouri, Kansas, and you just say to yourself, what is wrong with these schools? Are they that pig-headed, egotistical that you could say what you want, but there's no look? If Michigan and Notre Dame could figure out ways to play each other, there's just no excuse. You got to. Why isn't Missouri playing Kansas every year? Why isn't Nebraska playing Oklahoma?
Yeah, they might start again, especially Missouri and Kansas. If you're Missouri, are you scared of Kansas, really? And if you're Kansas, Missouri's better program than you, but it's not. It's not like you're playing Oklahoma. Or a surefire top 10 team there. So I'm with you.
Okay, but your pick of the week in the SEC is going to be Tennessee. I see exactly where you're going here. They're just on a big high. I'm still. I don't know how much they can continue this though with mediocre quarterback play because, and they are stepping up a little bit here. But Missouri's confidence level is pretty low. There's a chance, and everybody. I think most people believe they're not going to be eligible for the bowl. They kind of had their last big game last week, and they looked terrible against Florida. So I'm not sure what kind of enthusiasm they'll have this week.
Yeah, they've been brutal on offense. Last 4 games, they've scored 3 touchdowns, and one of those touchdowns was against Vanderbilt when they had an interception down to like the 5-yard line. So that drive shouldn't even count as an offensive touchdown. They have been it's a big mystery. They were so good offensively against inferior competition, but they were blowing people out at home. In Tennessee they haven't. It's not like they've beaten a lot of good teams, but they've definitely played well.
Good defense.
Went over Mississippi State, South Carolina, UAB, Kentucky there, and I think Jared Garantano has actually played well. They just they haven't committed to him yet. He's they talk about him being their 6th man coming off the bench. Well, I know they had some issues earlier this year with changing the play call and all that, but I think he's their best option there. And I just think right now they're the better team. I think the wrong team is favored in this one.
All right, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky all need 2 wins each for bowl eligibility. All right, quickly, because we're going to talk a lot about this.
I think Tennessee needs 1. Tennessee needs 1. They're 5-5.
Okay. Let's talk about the coaching changes that we'll be talking a lot about over the next few weeks. First of all, we've already talked about Malzahn going to Arkansas. Now there's reports that maybe Houston Nutt could return to Arkansas. We've also heard the Mike Leach to Arkansas rumors. So, wow, this is becoming an interesting job opportunity.
Did you see? Now, I saw Houston Nutt, but then I read further, and I think he's just working as a consultant there. So you might have seen other reports.
That's okay. But
I saw him quoted about the job in more of a consultant.
Okay.
Role. So, he's still relatively young, I think. I'd have to look it up. I bet he's, late 50s and stuff.
Yeah.
He actually did a good job there. His first time around, won 3 division titles, I believe. Maybe not all under him. Arkansas has won 3 division titles since they.
Why did he
league,
leave?
So.
He was just fired for.
He was fired pretty much. I mean, he ran into the whole. There's an off the field thing with a. Marital issue, an extramarital affair, I believe.
Okay.
I think he saw Ole Miss as kind of a safe landing there. So actually, I got into a big debate with a colleague over this. I always said he just left on his own, but then my friend at work actually, knew more people in Arkansas. It basically, I think Houston Nutt got fired at Arkansas and then had a soft landing at Ole Miss.
Speaking of Arkansas, we haven't heard the name Brett Bielema too much, but he is the defensive line coach with the New England Patriots, which is a very good stepping stone position if you want to get back into being a head coach, especially, college or even pro level. So what do you think about him returning to college football as a head coach?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have shocked me if he, his name was mentioned earlier. It doesn't look like it's going to happen at Rutgers because of Greg Schiano, but he seemed like he might be a good fit at Rutgers. I can see him getting another Power 5 job down the road because great track record at Wisconsin. I think he's still pretty well respected there.
Yeah,
so,
just a weird decision. That's all. Nobody understood why he decided to leave Wisconsin for Arkansas.
I think the ego got there and the challenge of the SEC, and there were some issues too. I mean, there's always issues behind the scenes that we're not privy to. I think it was ego, money, and just a chance to do something else.
There's reports that kind of went back and forth this week about Muschamp. So you think he's safe, though?
I've been adamant that he was not going to get fired because of the things that the athletic director was saying, and then now the president comes out and says other things, and then all this big mess this week, and they finally came out and said that he will be the coach in 2020.
And you believe that?
I believe it for now.
All right. Yeah, right, for now. All right, what about Luke? Does he return at Mississippi?
Yes. Yeah, I think Luke did pretty much the talk was that they were kind of slow playing the hire of a new athletic director, so it would be difficult for the athletic director to make a coaching change, and they're kind of letting the athletic director candidates know that they are not making a change. That for financial reasons, and he's their own. They want to give him another
and
year.
He's got really good assistant coaches, and they have played very hard.
They're very young.
Yes, they are. And
there's hope there at Ole Miss, I think.
I think they're going to beat Mississippi State.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all.
And what about Mason? He's gone to Vandy?
No, they came out 2 days ago and said he's 100% coming back.
And you're okay with that?
Sure.
It's Vanderbilt.
It's a very I don't need to go into the dynamics of the Vanderbilt situation here, but the thinking locally is that new athletic director, they are going to make some facility announcements, upgrades in the next year. So if you are going to make a change, you'd probably rather have that stuff going on if you're going to make a change, rather than make a change now before that happens.
Let's go.
That makes sense.
Let's go to the Big Ten, and I guess we shouldn't be too surprised how Minnesota played, especially early in the game. They were completely out of sorts. This is what happens when you're just not used to winning the big games and you go on the road in a tough environment. And still, they almost found a way to pull out that game. But a loss is a loss. Now, they still control their own destiny to win the Big Ten. And if they run the table, beat Wisconsin, beat, let's say, an undefeated Ohio State, they still even have a shot of the playoffs. So it's not going to be as easy or guaranteed, but they still have a shot. But tough loss for the program, and even tougher was Morgan getting concussed at the end of the game because he's in a concussion protocol. They cannot afford to lose this game against Northwestern.
Right, and fortunately they're playing Northwestern. They might not need to score a lot of
True.
points. So that was just a tough assignment to bounce back and having to go to Iowa. That we talked. They might not have been where they were, getting all that national attention, but their schedule, if they would have just swapped, played Iowa 3 weeks ago and then played
or Northwestern
last week.
Yeah.
It would have been much better. But hey, that's life with the big boys
right.
there, and they moved the ball. They put up some yards there. It wasn't like they got completely shut down. They just fell behind early and couldn't make enough plays to win the game.
Michigan blew out Michigan State, and they continue to be playing, in my opinion, the best football. This is clearly the best team and the best mojo period that Michigan's had under Harbaugh, because they get Patterson coming off his best game. That's always been an issue for them, is good quarterback play. Patterson's letting his star receivers finally make the plays because they got a very good receiving core, and now they're showing it when he can get him the ball. The offensive line is doing the job, and the defense has been fantastic. So they are going to cause Ohio State a lot of problems, but they better not sleep past Indiana, because you liked Indiana as an upset last week. They almost pulled off the upset. They even looked like at times they were outplaying Penn State in that game. This is going to be a tough game for Michigan.
Yeah, that might have been Indiana's most impressive performance, the loss to Penn State, and they were 7-2 before that. So I totally agree. Even they're showing their quarterback depth with Ramsey playing, with Penix out. So very impressed with what Indiana's doing. And the interesting thing about Michigan was that they had been, in this recent run, they'd been kind of doing it on the ground. Well, last week, Patterson goes over 300 yards for the first time in his Michigan career, so showing that they can get things done offensively multiple ways. So I hope they continue to play well, just because I want that Michigan-Ohio State game to be fun and to mean a lot.
Yeah, they can't go back and reverse. They need to continue. Even if it doesn't matter what the score is. It could even be a little bit higher scoring. Yeah, I think it's more important, to tell you the truth, that Michigan's that they have a little bit more offense than defense in this game, because they're not going to beat Ohio State unless they show they can move the football, which they couldn't do last year in the game.
Exactly.
And that's why they changed the entire offense. So, all right. So Penn State, Ohio State, that's the big game. Look, Michigan, definitely the way it looks right now, and they get the home game, looks like they have the better chance to beat Ohio State. If you think Ohio State's going to lose in the next 2 weeks, that's the game. But this is not an easy game for Ohio State, because Penn State's got a very good defense. The only thing I'm a little bit concerned with is after the Minnesota game, I didn't see the Penn State defense get any better. And I wonder whether or not Minnesota exposed Penn State. And if that's the case, then Penn State's in big trouble.
Yeah, I like Ohio State. I don't think it's going to be close, really. I just think they've been so much more dominant. It's not – if it was at Penn State and it was the whiteout game at night, maybe that's one thing. But, Ohio State's closest win is by 24 points over Michigan State. Penn State has 4 wins by 7 points or fewer. So give them credit for winning games. But when we're judging the quality of a team, there's no doubt that Ohio State has been far more impressive, pretty much, across the board. I know Penn State's defense has been very good, but I like I like Ohio State in this game. Interestingly enough, Penn State has had double-digit fourth-quarter leads 2 years in a row against Ohio State and lost both times.
No, we'll see what happens on Saturday. I think it's going to be close. I don't know if they can cover. If Ohio State, they can just score 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter in 3 minutes and cover. So I would be a little bit worried about that. But I still think that there's a chance that if it was a one-game deal with Minnesota, maybe they just had one of those hiccup games because of the Minnesota game, and that was the reason. So I'm still thinking there's a shot, but I see where you're going without a doubt.
Yeah.
Because Penn State, it's still it's Ohio State and Penn State, and Ohio State usually gets the upper hand in these matchups, whether they're close or not. As far as bowls, we've got Michigan State, Nebraska, Purdue all need to win a couple of games. I like the way Purdue's been playing. I think that maybe they could keep that under 24, and maybe if Wisconsin has one of those bad weeks, then maybe that could be closer than people think. I can't do anything with Nebraska because I just can't trust them at all. I don't care if it's against Maryland.
Right.
And I don't know what to think about Michigan State Rutgers. Michigan State's lucky they're playing Rutgers because I don't trust Michigan State against most anybody except maybe Rutgers.
I totally agree there. I think Michigan State wins the game, but if Michigan State were playing anyone else, there's just not, use the term mojo about Michigan, there's not a lot of positive mojo around the Michigan State program at all. Will D'Antonio says he plans on being back next year in the school, so they're not going to fire him, but D'Antonio wouldn't be surprised if he decides to retire.
Okay, let's go to the ACC, and they've got the game tonight, NC State and Georgia Tech. And on Saturday, Liberty needs a win this week or at New Mexico State for a bowl. I could see them doing it, of course, next week. But it's strange to see Virginia as a 16.5-point favorite against Liberty because it's like, well, that seems really low, but I can't trust Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see their focus because they know what they have coming up next week.
Yes.
That they could be in a winner-take-all against Virginia Tech, a team I believe it's 13 straight losses to. So this is all Bronco Mendenhall's job this week is to keep his team focused because Liberty's it's not like they're playing an FCS team where they just need to show up, even though they've struggled with those in the past. Liberty's good enough to put some points on the board. So I'll be interested to see what kind of focus Virginia plays with. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to be ready to play.
Well, Georgia Tech hasn't done anything offensively like all season except when they played Virginia. And
Right.
Liberty actually played BYU tough last time out. So, yeah, I think that game might be because of the look-ahead situation and because the game means absolutely nothing to Virginia. That could be an issue if you're thinking about the 16 being too easy. And, again, the game next week only is for the Coastal, depending on the Pitt-Virginia Tech game. Now,
Right. Virginia Tech needs to win, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Virginia Tech needs to win this week, and then it's all for the marbles next week. Pitt can win the Coastal if they beat Virginia Tech this week and Virginia Tech beats Virginia next week. So what do you think? It is. So who do you like in Pitt, Virginia Tech?
I like Virginia Tech. I think, it's 6 out of their last 7, I believe, with the only loss coming against Notre Dame by 1 point when Claypool made that great 4th down catch there. So we kind of forgot about them nationally after they lost to Duke on that Friday night at home, but they've been pretty good since.
I agree. I like Virginia Tech in that game as well. One of your top picks, which I'm a little bit surprised, but you've got a 4-star pick for BC, 20-point dog against Notre Dame. BC needs to win either this week or at Pitt next week for bowl eligibility. If they don't go to a bowl, I think Adazio's done. Do you agree with that?
Yes. My rationale is just the number's too high. They have scored in their last 4 games when they're not playing Clemson. They scored 39, 45, 58, and 31. So their offense has been pretty good. I know Notre Dame's defense is good, but I just basically think they score enough to make Notre Dame sweat.
Okay, sounds good. And also in the ACC, I like Syracuse. They need to win this week and next week against Wake Forest. They had a blowout win against Duke. This game,
shocking.
Yeah, and this game means nothing for Louisville. They're still probably celebrating the change from last year to this year getting into a bowl. So I think maybe they're gonna not be focused enough. So I think Syracuse might actually be able to pull off the upset.
Here's the thing about Louisville, though. Not that what place you finish matters that much. they win this game, they clinched 5-3. They clinched second place all by themselves in the Atlantic Division, which is something there. So my boy Scott Satterfield, he'll have him ready. You're dismissing him. There's nothing to play for. I disagree.
All right. What about Satterfield? Is there a job that can lure Satterfield away?
I've said since day one that not since Florida State fired Willie Taggart, that if I was Florida State, I'd go after Scott Satterfield. He would be my number one candidate.
And is Deion Sanders, speaking of Florida State? Okay, you're not even going to let me to end that question.
We're not wasting precious time on this podcast talking about that.
All right, Duke needs a win to get to a bowl. They got to win both games. I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, you know what, Duke, interestingly enough, I was looking this up. I think it was 2 years ago, had that awful late season slide, and then they turned it around their last two games and won big, and then I think won their bowl game. So this is not new to them, a kind of a losing streak out of nowhere, but they've been really bad. Quentin Harris, not quite the quarterback I thought he'd be for Duke.
Yeah, they've turned the ball over a ton this year. And I think North Carolina's going to make it, though. They'll beat Mercer, then they'll beat North Carolina State next week for the bowl. Agreed?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Big 12, unbelievable collapse by Baylor in the game after the way they looked. Look, the offense was so good in the first half, I started to question whether or not this was something that Matt Rule was keeping in his back pocket all year. And then the second half came, and it was like, oh, yeah, that's the offense we've seen all year.
The killer was the fumble. I mean, Oklahoma scores on its first possession in the second half, but Baylor, who wasn't stopped at all in the first half, first play of the second half for them, the running back goes like 20 or 30 yards, and you're like, okay, it's no problem. They'll just keep moving up and down the field, and the guy fumbles, and then Oklahoma gets the ball, and then they went three and out, and then the momentum turned. So, yeah, I'm with you. That was, Oklahoma just dominated the time of possession. They had they went 12 of 18 on third down. That's 18 third down attempts for a big play offense like Oklahoma. Usually that's unheard of.
I couldn't even. That's killer. All right, Texas and Baylor then. What do you think? Can Baylor regroup knowing that they've got the Kansas game in the back pocket next week?
Yes, I think they can. I think it's actually good that it's Texas because Baylor, like most schools in Texas, there's nothing they like more than beating Texas. So I don't think they'll. Sure, there's an emotional letdown there, but I think with the chance to beat Texas at home, they will be ready to play. I think that's why Matt Rule's a really good coach. He'll have his team ready to play. And, that Charlie Brewer, it's a big game for him. Obviously, his dad, grandpa played at Texas and stuff. And like we said, especially in the first half, I like what I've seen, like what we saw last week, at least in the first half from that Baylor offense.
Yeah, Texas still has a chance for the Big 12 championship game. They've got to, of course, win this week and then beat Texas Tech next week. They got to get Baylor to lose at Kansas next week, and then need Iowa State to lose this week or next week. The big one is Baylor losing at Kansas, but they got a shot. So it'll be it should be I think it'll be a decent game though, because I don't think Baylor can blow out anybody at home.
No, I agree. And Texas is, their defense has played better the last 2 weeks. They did a pretty good job on Iowa State.
By the way, I think Matt Rule might be the next head coach with the New York Giants. He interviewed the Jet job. He was the assistant with the Giants. I don't think the Giants are going to be – I think the Giants will be looking for a new head coach in the next couple of years, and I think Matt Rule is going to be the guy.
Yeah, I've been asked about Rule at other jobs. I don't think he leaves Baylor for a college job, but I think he'll be in the NFL in the next 2 or 3 years.
All right, TCU, do they stand a chance to keep the game close?
Sure. I mean, that Oklahoma defense, other than the second half last week, is suspect. But, TCU's offense hasn't been great. So, I like Oklahoma. I'd be surprised if TCU won.
Oklahoma State, the number's down to 5.5 because Sanders, the quarterback, out. Of course, Wallace, we talked about him being out last week. West Virginia gets the big win over Kansas State. They can win this week and then beat TCU on Friday, and all of a sudden they're in the bowl. I like him this week. I know Brown's got the Hawaii quarterback has experience, but now you're starting to play with some weird things where you're going now without Wallace, without Sanders. You're on the road. The game doesn't mean anything. I'm going to go ahead and say West Virginia wins the game.
Yeah, that's a good call. Drew Brown put up huge numbers at Hawaii. And, I mean, this isn't a knock necessarily, but, he transfers to Oklahoma State. Most guys grad transfer. They think they're going to start where they go. Where last year he gets beat out by Taylor Cornelius, who's basically just a career backup. And then this year they go with Sanders, the redshirt freshman, who's obviously very good. So not saying they don't, I don't know what's really going on there. I'm not behind the scenes. But the fact that Brown has never really gotten onto the field maybe tells you what they think of him.
All right, Pac-12 and Oregon and Utah had no problems last week. Do you think either team has an issue this week? Oregon's got the tougher test. They got to go to Arizona State, who needs one more win for bowl eligibility. And Arizona State's already done some crazy things the first couple of years under Herm Edwards. I don't suspect they're going to do anything crazy on Saturday night, but what do you think?
Yeah, I agree that Oregon's in more danger, but I like them both. I think Arizona's kind of they're in free fall. They fired the defensive coordinator a few weeks ago. They just fired today their defensive line coach, and Utah's defense has been so good. Just look at the stats compared to the rest of the Pac-12. They've been amazing. So Utah, I'd be shocked if they lost. Oregon, I'd be surprised if Oregon lost. But I like Utah big over Arizona.
And, of course, if Utah slips in the next couple of weeks, they play Colorado next week. USC could capitalize and play in the Big 12 championship game. The rivalry, USC and UCLA, it's a 13.5-point spread. Who do you like?
Yeah, it's another one of those early rivalries like Cal Stanford. I'd probably go UCLA to cover. They've been playing much better than we talked about it last week, and they go to Utah. It's 14-3 late second quarter. UCLA's driving to make it 14-10 or 14-6, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, as he has done earlier did in the Cincinnati game, just dropped the ball while eluding the rush, and Utah picks up and goes 60, 70 yards for a fumble, and then before you know it, ball game, and then UCLA got nothing going in the second half. So I think they bounce back and play well. I don't know if they win, but I like them to
Speaking
cover.
of bouncing back, boy, Cal, they get Garbers back. You had to think the worst thing that actually happened was getting Garbers back, because there had to be a buildup of excitement. Then he comes in. It's a close game in the second quarter. And then he goes out again, and they just had nothing after that.
Yeah, it's a shame because they were one of the early, I'm looking, they were one of the early season surprises. And, Justin Wilcox is a really good coach. They were 4-0, won at Ole Miss, lost close to Arizona State, lost close to Oregon. And Oregon, I'm looking at their first three losses were by 10 points or fewer. They beat Washington State, but they're just offensively challenged right now.
Both teams still have to win, Cal and Stanford, 2 games for bowl eligibility. Cal won for bowl eligibility, but and that just shows you where Cal is. They still got to win a game for bowl eligibility, for crying out loud.
And Stanford is they've secured the first losing Pac-12 season of the David Shaw era. They're going to 4-5 at best.
And you know what? If Costello does decide to leave, this kid Mills looks like he's another good quarterback that they've got. So,
they're in fine shape at the quarterback position. Mills is probably a better long-term prospect.
I love your upset pick this week. Oregon State getting 11, a 3-1 money line play. They got to win this week or next week, and they ain't beating Oregon at Oregon next week. So Oregon State's got to win this week for bowl eligibility. And you know what? So does Washington State. Don't they have to win another game for bowl eligibility too? Washington State.
Let me look.
I think so.
I'm looking right now. They're 5-5.
I left it off by bowl scenarios.
The Apple Cup. Yeah, I like Oregon State to win outright. They've been good on the road in the Pac-12. And if they win this game, they're 5-3, and they would secure a no worse than second place in the North. That's crazy. They are. Louisville has been stealing all the headlines this year, but Oregon State is just as improved as Louisville if you look at the stats.
All right, Colorado also needs to win a couple of times, but they're not going to do that because they got to play Washington and Utah. Let's go to the AAC, and as we look at that conference, UConn, by the way, we haven't talked about this. They're deciding to leave the AAC, so that's going to drop the AAC to 11 teams, and I guess they're going to go to a Big 12 no division format, right?
Yes, they're going to say 8 conference games, and they have not yet determined how they are going to determine the championship game teams. I would imagine they would be the top 2 teams in the standings because anything else would be weird.
Okay. As far as Cincinnati, they can clinch the East with a win this week or on Friday against Memphis, which is a huge game. Could be a rematch, an early rematch of the championship game. But I'm going to go with Temple. I don't like the way Cincinnati has had to 2 game-winning field goals as time expired in the last 3 games. They're playing with fire.
Flirting with disaster.
You agree with me then?
I'm with you. That's good call.
All right. Tulane, Central Florida. What do you think about that one?
I go Central Florida on the road.